Good afternoon and happy Friday to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to bring this presentation we know will be very impactful and informative as you continue servicing your states. We're going to allow just a few moments for everyone to enter in the room. If you have any issues or need to troubleshoot, just use the chat box. I'll be able to help you with those issues. At the end, if there's time, we'll address any questions that come up. And there'll also be a link to today's recording available, as well as the slide deck for you to view at your convenience. With that said, I'll pass it to you, Megan, to get us started.
Thank you, Jasmine. I appreciate that. And thank all of you for joining us today. This is the second webinar in SREB summer panel series on education and the economy. I'm Megan Boren, and I'll be leading our webinar today. And I also lead SREB's work on education human capital strategies. This afternoon, our esteemed panel will discuss the teacher shortages that are unfortunately plaguing all of our states right now, how they affect education outcomes, and how they also affect workforce development and the economy. This issue is really important to SREB. For the last few years, we've worked to establish highly collaborative services for our states to help them research and understand teacher shortages, what this calls them, how we can innovatively work to solve them. So today's panel will help discuss what we do and do not know about teacher shortages, how these shortages are affecting education outcomes and student learning, how severe the problem really is, and how this problem is affecting states' long-term workforce and economic development efforts. And we'll also discuss how a few of our SREB states are working hard to find a way forward. So on our panel today, we have six excellent folks here to discuss this issue with you all. We have Nicole Smith, who's the chief economist and research professor from Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. We also have Mr. Nick Moore, the policy advisor and coordinator in Alabama's Governor's Office for Education and Workforce Transformation. We also have Tabari Wallace, the special advisor and state superintendent for principal engagement at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And also from North Carolina, we have Brenda Berg, who's the CEO of Best NC, which is the business for education success and transformation in North Carolina. And also we have today two folks from Mississippi, Glenn East, the superintendent of Gulfport Public Schools, and Dr. Ben Burnett, the executive vice president and former dean of the School of Education at William Carey University. So thank you all so much for generously sharing your time and expertise with us today. And without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into our conversation. So as a parent, I know that I can ask any parent who's in our Zoom room right now if they're concerned about their child's education after the last year of pandemic-affected learning. And the answer will most assuredly be a resounding yes. It has been every conversation I've had with parents over the last year. The current economy and labor market trends are just as top of mind for many of us as well after the last year. There's still much to study regarding the ramifications of pandemic school closures and long-term at-home virtual learning and how the pandemic is affecting the overall workforce and economy. But what has been studied for some time is the direct connection of outcomes in education to workforce development. So I want to start here. Nicole, I'm going to turn to you first. As an economist and researcher who's been studying education and the workforce and economy for quite some time, tell us please some highlights from your research regarding education and the workforce. How do P-12 education outcomes affect post-secondary credentialing and thus affect the workforce as a whole over time?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the research that we're doing at Georgetown. But I think with the time given, I'll just let you know that once we talk about K-12 and post-secondary, the issue at hand is a pipeline. Okay, so post-secondary education, as we know, the demand for that has increased substantially. I mean, by our estimate, 65% of all jobs today require some type of post-secondary education and training beyond high school. So once we know that all of the jobs that you're going to take and require post-secondary education, you're naturally going to look back to see, okay, well, what's the pipeline that is feeding this post-secondary education channel? So we care about the pipeline. We know that demographics, we're going to face a demographic challenge. The population that we're training today is much harder than it was, 20 or 30 years ago. And that probably explains the differences we observe in our completion rates. Most of us know that by census estimates, by 2042, we're going to have a majority minority population, whereby if you were to summarize all of the African American, Latinx, Latino populations, minority populations for the entire country, it's going to be larger than the white population. Well, in so doing, we also have to look at completion rates for these groups. And where English is not your first language, it's sometimes much harder to train these groups. And as a result, graduation rates are a concern. So we have to pay very, very close attention to what's happening in the K-12 system to make sure that we are adequately, we're efficiently stocked to provide what's necessary for this particular group. Although 2042 is the year we're majority minority, I think for the K-12 group, we're already there, depending on location. So for some, we already have a majority of underserved minority populations, and that's a concern. So our research also points to the cost of education and how that's been increasing, especially the cost of post-secondary education and the cost of college. And we need to make sure that when students actually enter post-secondary, that they complete and they don't necessarily get stumped in the whole quagmire of remediation and remedial courses because they have not had the sufficient amount of training to get them prepared for post-sec the second year around. So I think this is a wonderful forum to start talking about the needs of K-12 and to make sure that we are adequately prepared for what's coming down the pike.
Thank you. I'll ask a couple follow-ups, Nicole. There's some recent research you all just put out around post-secondary achievement and how that affects the workforce. So I'd love to ask, how does increasing or decreasing P12 student learning trends affect post-secondary achievement? And then how does that post-secondary achievement affect the workforce supply that the states need?
So I want to talk a little bit more broadly about the role of education. And I think, the research that we looked at most recently basically explored the extent to which post-secondary directly impacts lifetime earnings of individuals, the extent to which post-secondary education can impact your tax pool, the extent to which states themselves benefit from having workers who with higher education who might necessarily, have better healthcare outcomes, who might also have less burden on the social system. So there are many advantages of education on the whole, especially post-secondary education. But I think some of the research that we've done really points to the broad macroeconomic impact that more K-12 education has. And there's one economist in particular that I really like to quote by the name of James Heckman. And he tells us that by age 18, 50% of the variation we observe in earnings takes place, the factors that impact that variation takes place by the time you're age 18. So what they're telling us, or what that research points us to, is that if we don't take care to ensure that we do a good job of making sure our K-12 students are well equipped for the future, then 50% of their possible earnings potential can be affected. And we can't do anything about the coincidence of birth. We can't necessarily do anything about whose parents you're born to. But what we can do is to make sure, irrespective of where you end up, that once you get to our K-12 system, that you are exposed to a program that prepares you for the future, prepares you for life, prepares you to, improve your cognitive ability and your cognitive development, so that you are better able to connect to those post-secondary opportunities. The last thing I want to say is that over the last 40 or 50 years, we know that jobs in this country have become much more post-secondary oriented. Even if you look at manufacturing, where it's the prime industry, where automation and mechanization has really taken jobs away from individuals. But what we've observed is that we're sort of at a turning point where we're not necessarily only focusing on replacing individuals or replacing people with jobs, but now we're looking at the symbiotic relationship that takes place between individuals and automation. And that symbiosis requires a real understanding of cognitive ability, a real understanding of education that connects that digital divide. And that really happens early on in your K-12 training. I think beyond that, it's almost playing catch up and much more expensive to do that. So we have to make sure that if you look at where the economy is going and where those jobs are being developed and how those jobs are being developed, that focusing on your K-12 really is going to take you there. So that's really the challenge.
Thank you, Nicole. There's some excellent research there that you're pointing to, and great points about how intertwined K-12 education is with workforce development and economic results. Nick, I'd like to turn to you to see what you're seeing from the state perspective and covering education and workforce development in Alabama. Do you see any connections between having inexperienced or uncertified teachers and learning stagnation or loss for students? And does having any unprepared or inexperienced teacher affect K-12 student achievement? And if so, is this affecting post-secondary achievement in Alabama as well?
Well, thanks so much, Megan, for the question and for the opportunity to join you today. I would like to answer that by extending a bit on what Dr. Smith mentioned, first of all, in regard to Dr. Heckman. So we also look at some of the research from Dr. James Heckman and a lot of the work that he's done in the developing essentially a curve or an equation that shows that you get the greatest impact for a dollar invested the earlier that you get. So the highest level would be the first 5 years, and then there's a diminishing marginal return at every phase thereafter. So if we take this and sort of overlay that to the question you asked me, what is the opportunity cost at the K-12 level, at the post-secondary level, for missed opportunities and transitions that are not appropriately addressed? So Governor Ivey is very focused in having a P20W strategy that connects our earliest years of learning all the way up from the first 3 years through the workforce, and intentionally braiding and blending funding, try to make up for some of the deficits. Now that includes the fact that there are certainly some correlations that you could make, certainly anecdotally and more empirically, where you can show that, for example, in Alabama, 79% of our teachers are white, only 19% are Black, yet white students are making up a smaller percentage of, as Dr. Smith said, of the public school population. And so we also have to take into account not just the quantitative factor, but also the qualitative factor of what are the missed opportunities when students do not have, as research also shows, teachers of that they can identify with. And so that also leads to the lost opportunity. Now, thinking about the fact that 123 of our 138 districts are looking at hiring teachers on emergency and provisional certification basis. The fact that in June of last year, we only had 1,600 retirements compared to 1,800 this year. There's certainly a lot of reason to believe that there's a direct result, and not only what has happened during COVID, but even before then, on post-secondary achievement and then earnings outcomes for Alabamians who do not have the opportunity to learn from a well-trained certified teacher. And the fact that we see a lot of those districts to where we're seeing emergency certifications and provisional certifications in areas where we have a higher proportion of at-risk students, minority students, I think only compounds the other deficits that are existing there. So yes, we can look at this quantitatively, but I think we also have to look at the qualitative factors that compound the nature of missed opportunity that particularly our at-risk students face due to the teacher shortage.
Thanks for that, Nick. I appreciate it. Nicole, I want to bounce back to you real quick. Researching education and the workforce together for quite some time. Do you see, can you make any connections? Are you seeing any linkages at all between teacher shortages in quantity and in quality with any declines in the workforce that are needed for a thriving economy over long term?
So we do have many examples internationally where teacher shortages have led to negative results in the long term. So I think there's two variables we have to look at, and most of the research points to additional years of schooling. So they look at the relationship between additional years of schooling and what that means for GDP growth and long-term economic prosperity. And we found that each additional year of schooling is very positive. Overall, we want to make sure that we have as a highly qualified population as possible. But I think what's really important to the question you've raised is not only quantity of education that's there, but also quality of education. And some of the international research points to the extent to which cognitive development might impact outcomes. So if you were to look at performance in standardized tests and performance, in those types of English and math tests at the K-12 level, looking internationally over a 40-year time horizon, we have some data that says that, cognitive skill developed the K-12 performance for every 0.5 standard deviation change in cognitive skill in the base year can lead to about a 1 percentage point increase in GDP over a 40-year period. So we know that any type of teacher shortage, which puts students at a disadvantage with developing that cognitive skill in those formative years, can really put an entire society at risk. If I'm looking here at numbers over a 40-year period, and a 1% in GDP. I mean, I have the national numbers, not necessarily state numbers for each of the states, but our GDP stands at around 20 trillion per year right now, and that 1% is significant. So if you look at it on a state-by-state basis, it's really important to make sure that focus on not just the quantity of education, but the quality of education to get those cognitive skills out and to make sure that we create the types of foundational pathways that lead us to that post-secondary outcome as seamlessly as possible.
Nick, I'll turn it back to you from an actual state perspective. Any additional thoughts that you have? How could P-12 learning loss and declines in post-secondary achievement affect the workforce supply for Alabama's top industries? And how would this affect the state's ability to attract and keep businesses and keep Alabamians employed?
I think we have to look at from the perspective of if someone is missing critical milestones. So let's take a look at, for example, the 5 benchmarks in Governor Ivey's Strong Start, Strong Finish strategic plan. Begins with pre-K readiness, then school readiness, then literacy and numeracy, which she calls the blocking and tackling of education, college and career readiness, and then post-secondary readiness, including post-secondary attainment. each one of those milestones can be inhibited if a student does not have access to a high quality teacher and quite frankly, a quality school culture and environment. And so let's take one critical benchmark, that third benchmark of literacy and numeracy. So for example, if a student, and many people have indeed on this call have worked on this issue, we know that there's not a magic line in the sand that if a student is not reading at this time, then all of a sudden that there's some irreversible marker there. But we do know that about age 8, transition into fourth grade, that a lot of your brain development, or about 95% of your capacity to learn, has developed at that point. And so the longer that we allow deficits to compound, the more scarce public resources have to go into mitigating those deficits, and the harder it is for that individual student to make up for those deficits. So what we see is a marginal cost there that we would otherwise not be paying as a state had we not had those initial shortages. So we're to the point that I believe Dr. Smith made earlier, we're playing somewhat of a catch-up game that is stemming from the teacher shortage. And certainly that is an unacceptable economic cost to pay.
Thank you, Nicole and Nick, for highlighting some key points here of how education and the economy are so inextricably linked. I want to move on and talk a little bit about the teacher shortage specifically. Education is a human-centered enterprise. Of course, we all know this, and teachers have always been the lifeblood of the education system. Without teachers, no other profession is actually possible. So it's imperative, not only from an education standpoint, but also, I think, as you all just pointed out, an economic standpoint, that our schools have enough effective teachers to serve every student enrolled. So if we know that teacher shortages exist, but there are some inconsistencies in the definitions of shortages, both quantity and quality, and the data reporting state by state, district by district. So it makes it a little bit hard to confidently ascertain the severity of the teacher shortage in any specific state. But what we do know, we have some excellent data pieces, sourcing some from federal sources as well as state and district sources. And we can see some trends using the data we do have. One worrying trend is that the supply of teachers is in decline and has been in decline for quite some time. We know that the number of inexperienced and uncertified teachers is on the rise. And overall, these trends have worsened in the last decade since the Great Recession. So let's talk about how severe our teacher shortage problem really is in our region and what's caused it. On the screen, I've put up here some numbers. You can see federally sourced teacher data shortages for our region as kind of a peek into some of the numbers and data that we have. We also have some data by teacher shortages in subjects and different grade levels coming from each state. We can see this year by year, but here's a snapshot for you all. So as you're looking through this data a little bit, I'd like to turn to Brenda. I know that you've been analyzing some data specifically for North Carolina for quite some time around teacher shortages and education outcomes. So I'd like to turn to you and ask, what are you seeing in the data in North Carolina about the severity of teacher shortages and any trends over time? Are you seeing teacher shortages in certain subjects, geographical areas? Do you see enough new teachers coming down the pipeline to fill vacancies?
Yeah, thank you, Megan, and thanks for having us. Speaking for myself and for Tabari Wallace, who will present some of our solutions later in the conversation. We're just really grateful to be part of this conversation and learning a lot from my fellow panelists. I do want to touch on some data that we've been looking at. We've been for the last year working on something called MC Stride. I'll actually put it in the chat. It's a teacher recruitment action plan for North Carolina. And the data are really important because there's a lot of sort of mythology around teachers. I think we all know that teachers and principals are the most important factor in student success. Just as the data on starting early, high quality educators are critically important. We heard from Dr. Smith on that as well. we started with, for example, in North Carolina, we have 1,646 reported teacher vacancies, which sounds like a lot, particularly when you think that's about 30,000 students without a teacher in their classroom. The challenge with this is that would represent about 1.6% of our workforce. And as many of us, especially coming out of the COVID crisis, there are industries that are looking at 20 and 30% vacancy rates. And so the question that first comes to mind is, what are we talking about here when we're looking at data that's 1.6%, but we're talking to students and teachers and principals who clearly are struggling with the issue of the teacher supply. And so we really wanted to dig a little bit deeper and look at the pipeline, but also look at the quality. So one place we looked is at the kind of like your previous chart on fully licensed and new teachers. We looked at across the entire state of North Carolina, the teachers who are not fully licensed. And as you can see, there's wide variation from 7% to 54%. So imagine a school district with 54% of your teachers are not fully licensed. And this brings up a whole bunch of questions, right? Like, are we using the right criteria for licensing? Does that mean that they're necessarily bad? Is being a beginning teacher, how do we sort through that? And that, again, Tabari will get to that in a little bit. Another thing that we looked at is where are our teachers coming from? We can pull up the next slide. And our pipeline of talent is really changing. You had earlier the percentage decline in ed prep enrollment and graduation. We're seeing the same thing in North Carolina, but what is the flip side of that is that we are actually filling classrooms, as you saw with the 1.6%, which I think is an underreport, but that's another question. But you can see even in the last 5 years, we had a surge in non-traditional entrance into the teaching profession from 23% to 37%. So more than a 50% increase in teachers coming from non-traditional pathways, which lots of great candidates. Our current teacher of the year is extraordinary. She came non-traditional, but overall, it is our lowest performing pool of candidates. So how do we siphon out or better prepare or whatever we need to do on that? And then lastly, just one other reflection we have from North Carolina's perspective. Again, you can find this in that report and also on the Best NC website. But we also, I think we're all looking at, Nick Moore, you talked about the teachers reflecting their students, and in this map you can see teachers are the gray bars and students are the black bars, and we're working on kind of that disproportionality, but we're also looking at where are those teachers coming from, particularly that non-traditional pathway is coming from our existing labor force. So the yellow bars here are our workforce in North Carolina. And when you look at that, if we just pull from the current workforce in North Carolina, or the kids who are naturally going to college anyway, we're not going to hit that diversity mark. There's just no way. We're going to have to start earlier. We're going to have to start talking to kids in middle school and high school who would not have gone to college but for becoming a teacher. So really starting the teacher recruitment efforts earlier. So again, some of the lessons are: one, we need better data. Two, we need to think about is licensure the bar that we should be using? Three, for these non-traditional candidates, are we throwing them in the deep end of the pool, or can we do a better job in supporting them? And I guess four, I would say, starting earlier. Those are some of the data points that's driven our work here in North Carolina.
Thank you, Brenda. I want to turn now to our friends in Mississippi. I'm going to show some more regional data as I turn to ask Glenn and Ben a few questions. So Glenn, I'm going to start with you. Are you and your colleagues in districts around Mississippi having trouble finding quality teachers to hire? And if you could go into any reasons as to why. Oh,
thank you, Megan. Like everybody else, thanks for having us today, and we look forward to working with each other as we have before and solving some issues. I want to drive home the first point I think that we've all made, that it takes 2 or 3 years after having a poor teacher to correct that situation. So yes, I am fortunate to be along with the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the 3 counties here. There's 11 school districts, and we compete for teachers yearly, especially in the world of special ed. And then, of course, the math and science is mostly for us in the advanced world. But as I spread out across our state, you see even more situations where we're struggling to find just a good, strong elementary school teacher to come in and work with children, especially in the world of reading, and to make sure that we're preparing students for each grade level as they matriculate through our system. So for us in Mississippi, it is 100% the special education piece. And then for us on the coast, it's that advanced math and science piece. And then across our state, there's a constant struggle just to find an outstanding elementary school teacher.
Ben, would like to ask you, from your position at an education preparation program, can you talk about what it's looking like with the teacher pipeline right now? Are you seeing enough teachers who are preparing to become to enter the profession, and students who want to enter the profession?
Well, thanks for including me on today's conversation. And in my introduction, she gave me my qualifications of being executive VP, but my real life was 28 years in K-12. So I just want everybody to know that's the kind of frame of reference I'm coming from. I was a school superintendent alongside Glenn for a while before I retired and came into the higher ed world in the private university. So we are here at William Carey, we're a little different because since we're a private university, we can take people who spent a career in K-12 and are drawing the retirement system and lure them here. So we have a good, or everybody here in our faculty did K-12 first. So we've really thrown ourselves at this issue and are really passionate about going out and trying to get candidates to fill the vacancies. And Glenn's school district is right in the backyard of one of our campuses. And so we're proud to partner with him. But we have a lot of barriers that are keeping us from doing that. And it's not specific just to William Carey University, but it's across the state and probably across the nation too. Accreditation in Mississippi was voluntary until about 2 or 3 years ago. That state ed prep programs that were in the private schools did not have to seek national accreditation. Now everyone has to do that. William Carey was already accredited by NCATE and now by CAPE, but that is a yearly struggle. The salary in Mississippi is one of our biggest barriers versus the tuition expenses, with tuition expenses going up at private and public institutions, and then the salaries not going up very much. We did have a $1,000 salary raise this year by the legislature, but that's hardly enough to offset that. Licensure exams are a continued barrier. In addition to Praxis Core, Praxis 2, we also now have foundations of reading test for all of our elementary ed candidates that they have to take. And there's been a huge focus on literacy in Mississippi, which is a great thing. And we're seeing some increases in those areas, but that licensure exam is difficult. Public perception in Mississippi for public school teachers is very difficult to overcome. And that's not just a Mississippi problem. I read not too long ago that the Phi Delta Kappa annual Gallup poll shows that more than half of the parents in the country don't want their children to become teachers. So we have parents fighting against it. In our experience, when we're going out and recruiting in the buildings and talking to students, we're finding that a lot of teachers are trying to talk their students out of becoming a teacher. I don't have any data to support that, but I can tell you that it is happening. We've already talked about the hard to fill certification areas, and science is certainly in there, with special ed and math. Megan, a couple things I wrote down after hearing some other people speak. We have a huge retention problem in Mississippi. Close to 50% are leaving in the first 5 years. Not leaving the district and going from one place to another, but they're leaving the profession. And that's just huge for us because we're not cranking out enough, but they're leaving in droves. In addition to that, our state retirement system has gone up to where you have to now put in 30 years instead of 25 years to draw a retirement benefit. And so a lot of people are not thinking that they can hang in there for 30 years. We have a large number who can retire right now that got in under the 25-year rule. So at any point, if everybody who could retire in Mississippi did, we would almost have to shut the schools down. And the last point I want to make, problem that we're facing is attracting minority teachers. There's been a lot of discussion about majority, minority. Well, in Mississippi, we're there. 45% of Mississippi public school students are white. So the white students in Mississippi in public schools are the minority. But our population of our teachers doesn't not reflect that. So we're not attracting the right teachers and enough teachers to the profession in that area.
Thanks, Dr. Burnett. I want to follow up with you, and I know you had a few points about the impact of COVID, but follow up with you and Glenn as well in your conversations with students in high schools and in colleges. I know that there's some anecdotal talk that educator prep programs might be seeing a little bit of a rise now in enrollment. We're hoping it's a new trend. We don't know if it's really going to be a trend. It's been on the decline for the last 10 years. So anything else you guys would like to say about why you feel more college students aren't planning to teach?
Well, not about the aren't, but more than anecdotal about the increased number. Megan, if I can jump in on that. I don't know what the data is from the other universities. I do know that most of them have seen an increase this year because of the suspension of some of the licensure exams that are waived through December of this year. We had a huge increase in our alternate route certification program this summer. Saw almost 500 candidates in that program just this summer. And our undergraduate population increased from 170 to over 360 in just 2 years. And a lot of that is due to the licensure exams being waived.
Megan, to hit your point directly straight ahead, is in 2018, we had the Superintendent's Collaborative that brought 2 seniors from about 10 different school districts across our state. And we asked the question point blank, why are you not going into education? And Ben alluded to the #1 answer from them was educators were telling them not to go into education. And then of course the parent piece as well. So that hits home that we've got a shortage already. We have educators that are working hard and are tired, and we're not getting them to the end of this. And that's what really ties it all back to the economy piece. We've made the point that good teachers drive the economy. But if teachers are burning out on us across the country and students are being told not to go, that closes that pipeline down almost immediately. So we've got that anecdotal research from a small group of seniors just sitting around the room one day talking about life and what they wanted to do. So in our world, that's important. And that's about the relationships that teachers have with students and how to build those and recruit students in as early as possible into this profession.
I can echo that as well. We have a teacher recruitment initiative in North Carolina called Teach NC, and there's an ad campaign to sort of lift up the profession. And what we discovered that was fascinating is we put all of our teacher pipeline resources in one place. It's never been done before. And we had 80,000 visitors in the first year, 5,000 subscribers. Now think about that. If each and every one of them became a teacher, it would flood our entire pipeline for the year. And what we found is that the vast majority of them had college degrees and had, like you said, been told they shouldn't be a teacher, but their teacher, their parent, you know, the newspaper headlines. And just by putting real information on the website, you know, we drove them there with the campaign and the social media, but once they got there, they got real information about what does licensure look like. It answered a lot of their questions. So we also, most importantly, we gave them the opportunity to talk with an actual North Carolina teacher who could answer their questions to what it was like. We give them opportunities to try it on because there's a lot of fear involved. And then third, we also even have a live chat. So you can actually ask those questions in real time, all those nitty-gritty nuance. It mitigates a lot of the problems like you talked about with licensure. It doesn't solve the problems. We still need to fix the licensure problems, but it mitigates a lot of those. And it certainly mitigates the perception issues. We converted, of those 5,675 minimum, probably a lot more because that's only the ones we were able to count, 675 converted to become teachers, either in ed prep programs or through residency. And that was year 1. So there are ways to tackle that. I think it's a shame, right, that we're hearing kids are hearing this from their teachers, but one day in the classroom and a lot of people realize that it's not for them, which is just as good, or that this is their life's calling. And it's a beautiful thing to watch that conversion.
Thanks for that, Brenda. And I want to get Tabari in here real quick before we wrap up talking about how severe the teacher shortage is and what's caused it. Tabari, you recently just left a principalship in North Carolina, former principal of the year as well. I'd love to know just quickly thoughts that you have in talking with teachers in and around your former district. Why are they leaving the profession in droves?
Well, I can definitely tell you, they're
They're not leaving his school. I'm just going to put that out. Everyone should know nobody leaves Tabari's school. He has one of the lowest turnover rates in the state. But go on, Tabari.
Yeah, I echo that, Brenda. You know, culture always drives academics and it drives retention. Always remember that. Good culture, people leave their bosses, not the institution. But I will tell you that teachers are in high demand. Matter of fact, I'll say that they are hunted by the private sector. They are avid problem solvers and they're sponges to new material and can adopt and adapt in any environment. The private sector knows that. So if they don't have to teach those soft skills or those unintentional skills to the applicant or to the candidate, then that puts them so much far ahead in their company. I will tell you that it was echoed before in these discussions that the lack of personalized support to the BTs within the first 5 years is a big reason that a lot of them leave. Thirdly, the perception of the profession. And then lastly, compensation. That's the elephant in the room. Compensation differs from state to state to state. But when you look at a high school student that when they were in elementary and middle said everybody's going to the NBA is going to play for the NFL, kids look and they compare the salary ranges of different professions as they're, in high school and they're traversing through their educational journey. And then they make the decision. That's why in the Human Capital Roundtable, we invest in early exposure to the babies graduating, coming right out of school so they can see the benefits and the thrills of this great profession we call education.
And let me dovetail right into Tabari, Megan, if I may, on that. And we have a low turnover in our world too, but in the bigger picture, the teachers there's a lot of things that are thrown at teachers today that have not traditionally been thrown at teachers today. And the importance of strong professional development is what keeps them there. So I think that you will find not only really good bosses keep teachers in the classroom, but that professional development to work them over the different things that are being thrown at them, that our IHLs locally are doing a good job of teaching, but to reinforce that when they walk in the door and understand they don't have all the answers. The sad part of this is we expect a teacher to be a 20-year experienced person when they walk in the first year. We can't do that. We've got to provide that professional development. So I think a lot of teachers leave the profession for the exact points Tabari is making, and the professional development that school districts are not providing or are unable to provide as we go forward. So it's really a 2 or 3-pronged fork that we're trying to do with to make sure we accomplish things.
Thank you, guys. I want to turn to Nicole and Nick to kind of give us the last comments here on perhaps the consequences of these shortages and if they get any worse. So Nicole and Nick, from your two completely separate vantage points and different perspectives, would just love to know any quick thoughts that you have on the projections of the teacher workforce supply in the future. That you can kind of tell from your two different vantage points, and any worries that you have on what this is going to do to the workforce overall.
Well, Megan, one of the first things I observed is that you have a picture talking about the teacher shortage, and you have a picture of a man in a profession that is predominantly female. So that tells me something. It tells me, you sort of want to project exactly where you want to go. Maybe you want to include more men in the teaching profession. I mean, as far as I can recall, about 75% of all teachers are women. About 90% of all nurses are women. And when you look at, the gender wage gap in these distributions, you wonder which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Is it that you get paid less because it's predominantly women, or the women gravitate towards professions that pay less? So to everyone's point about the wage gap, we need to be concerned about that. In my discipline, we often group teachers into what we call the intellectual and caring professions, which is really code for higher education, less pay. So you need to go to school and take out a lot of student loans, and you don't necessarily get the wages and salaries to pay for that. What concern, therefore, is something that was raised, as far as I know, maybe 10, almost 15 years ago, is student debt forgiveness for teachers. So if after a certain amount of years of paying back the student loans, if you haven't completed it and you are still dedicated in the teachers' professions, we have to agitate at the national level, at the federal level, to make sure that teachers get some sort of rebate there, so that they can get some assistance with the student loans. But we've spent a lot of time talking about why people exit the teaching profession and not necessarily why they enter, because I also have a lot of detail, a lot of information regarding why some people enter the teaching profession, and why some people enter out of other disciplines. In fact, I try not to be disparaging, but one of the things we often think of teaching as a parking profession. So a lot of people leave the STEM professions and they go into teaching. A lot of our students who are graduating with engineering majors, and that's one of our reports that we just released, are leaving it for the teaching professions, or STEM majors who are doing math and sciences. And one of the reasons they do this is that, teaching allegedly gives you better options for family formation and creating your families, so that you have pretty decent hours. You have times off on weekends, and pretty good summer. So I think part of the marketing of that is to recognize that, compared to some of the other disciplines, that teaching really allows an individual to develop other aspects of their person, other than just 100% being involved in just in your occupation. And that's something that we haven't had a chance to talk about. But the final thing I want to say is that whenever we have a discussion about teaching and how important it is, everyone turns to Finland and talks about Finland has some of the best teachers in the world, and we aspire to teach as the Finnish do. And what we don't talk about is the fact that in Finland they pay their teachers as much as they pay their engineers. So as much as I talk about all of the great reasons that people leave other professions and move into teaching, we still have to have that conversation about wages and salaries, and maybe just the fringe of having your student debt loan forgiven. But there has to be something that motivates involvement into the discipline, other than, hey, this is going to be a great career for you long term.
Nick, any quick final thoughts from you on?
Yes. So, something to note is, since 2010 in Alabama, we've seen a decrease in enrollment in our educator prep programs of 40%, which is a bit higher than the national average of 32%. And taking that a step further, so only 71% of our new teachers are still in the classroom after a year. And then that's down to 66% after 5 years. And some of our rural schools, we're seeing around 80% of their math and science classes being taught by teachers out of field. So take that one step further and look at our post-secondary attainment rate is 45%. And we are a state that is producing a lot more manufacturing jobs, a lot more STEM jobs. And so we're going to see the need to have skilled STEM workforce continue to increase at an exponential clip. And so the fear is that the gaps in our teacher workforce will end up causing a lagging indicator in particularly our STEM attainment. And so, and thinking about some of the solutions, I taught in the classroom for 3 years through Teach for America on an alternative certification. And there's a lot of other people who would like to have access to the profession that want to stay even longer than those 3 years I stayed. And so the idea is to make the entry and exit points into the profession a little bit more simpler and a little bit more transparent as well. And we also have to make sure that alternative programs take into account not just the myopic focus on quantity, but also on quality, and take some cues from some of the other advancements in workforce development around the lines of stackable credentials and the idea of truly looking at the competencies that someone needs to know to be an effective teacher, and then scaffold that into an effective educator prep program and begin to divest ourselves from some of the elements that may be less directly impactful in the classroom for new teachers. So that's certainly one way that we can eliminate some of the frustration for those that do want to come in and fill the gap, knowing that we have to have some short and medium term solutions as we try to shore up our long-term teacher talent pipeline.
Thanks, Nick, and for teasing up our next portion of the conversation. Wanted to turn to solutions, actually. It's very important to understand the problem, understand the magnitude of the problem, what's caused the problem, but we need to solve it. We know we're staring down the barrel of a really gloomy picture. If we don't stop losing great teachers, all of our citizens will be less prepared to enter the workforce of tomorrow, and businesses will struggle. Our economy will suffer. So it's a super urgent issue. I think we all understand that. And many state leaders are desperately trying to find the best solutions to fix this and reverse the teacher shortage. So, there's been an increase in discussions and legislative actions around emergency and provisionally certified teachers to fill vacancies. Talking about teacher preparation improvements and accountability, teacher pay, benefit changes, student loan forgiveness, changing licensure and so forth. So far it seems as if many of the strategies may be providing some level of short-term help for most of our states, but we really want to obviously look toward long-term solutions that will actually help reverse this trend and fix it overall, so to speak. So I'm going to jump to Tabari and ask you, Tabari, to kind of talk a little bit about the basic ways to better recruit more and more qualified teachers, to reach more teachers of color, and to keep more teachers in the classroom. And I know that you and Brenda are both, of course, members of the North Carolina Education Human Capital Roundtable, and you all have talked about this for a long time. So I'll turn to you first, and then Brenda can jump in as necessary to talk a little bit about, some of the basic principles that are needed to better recruit, retain, prepare, and diversify our workforce, teacher workforce.
Okay, well, I'll definitely begin by we have to do a better job of telling our story. Education is one of the best professions we have in the United States. You got to look at the perks. When you're looking at students, I mean, what other job are you going to have every holiday off? What other job you're going to have your summers to yourself if you want it? What other job are you going to be able to impact, inspire, and make an investment into the next generation? How else can you change the world if not through being a teacher and having an advent of having that expertise on every child? But when it comes to the tenets, I would say the early exposure to teaching, getting them as soon as they're coming out of high school. That's why the Grow Your Own programs have been so successful across the country. More hands-on practice, more professional development. A big one is removing the barriers to enter the profession, and that's what we really worked on in the Human Capital Roundtable, to make sure that we have more entry points and we have more ways to definitely be able to demonstrate your effectiveness in the classroom towards the end of your licensure experience. But overall, pretty much as I said before, is raising the respect of the teaching profession to, I would say, pre-1980s levels. As we saw in the pandemic, as we saw when we were at home and the kids were at home and parents were trying to help their students do Math 4 and Math 3 here in North Carolina, which is extremely difficult core. There was a need for teacher. Parents understood, I can't do this. I have to pick up the phone. We had more phone calls to teachers during the pandemic than we ever had in the past 5 years, because they understand that we are experts in our field, and they do understand that we have a role to play in society in preparing the next generation. And we just have to get that, again, before pre-1980s level of respect to the profession. And as far as minorities, I'll be remiss if I didn't answer that part of the question, Megan. As far as minorities, we're finding out through our work, through the Human Capital Roundtable work, through some of the work James Ford and his consortium has done. There is a unique experience that minority teachers go through during their first 3 years of education. And we have got to catch up in order to provide personalized, differentiated support to those minority candidates to make sure that they know that we understand what they're going through. We're here to support them. And definitely we have an expertise in regards to that support and investing in that minority candidate.
Thanks, Tabari. I'm going to go ahead and keep it with you right now and move us along, and ask you and your colleague Brenda, of course, to chime in. A very complicated question around how can we build on the key principles you just mentioned, some of the other principles the other panelists have mentioned so far about culture, about other key ways to recruit and retain that were shared, and how can we build on all of these pieces and form more improved state policies to help actually reverse teacher shortages and improve education outcomes?
Well, I will tell you, our state superintendent, Catherine Truitt's North Star is ensuring that a highly qualified teacher is in each and every class in the state of North Carolina. And that's what we're doing. We're taking, we're doing the reverse model. We're naming the goal and the vision first, and then we're reverse engineering, trying to make sure that we can get to that goal by learning from again, our outcomes and our mistakes. But again, as you see on the screen right there, the goal of the Human Capital Roundtable is to align teacher system advancement and compensation to outcomes that support student learning. Instead of the traditional input based on the licensure approach, whether or not you have a BA, a master's, or a doctorate, or what so have you. We want to base everything on student outcomes. The current established competencies, which is the standard test, or what we have in North Carolina called the praxis, which doesn't have a correlation to increased student outcomes. And as you can see, the framework is based on outcome-driven success, the career development, advancement of opportunities. The key is to have a menu of options for career autonomy. And you will see that when we get to the next diagram, that as you traverse across the paradigm, you will have options once you get to the license 5 tier, whether or not you want to stay in the profession, or you want to stay as a teacher, or do you want to progress up to be into an administration? But definitely providing standardized and robust teacher supports and a new compensation policy is vital to increasing the diversity and equity of the profession. So we anticipate differentiation in salary structure based on demonstrated performance in increasing student learning, instead of, again, the current model that's based largely on the years of service. So if you go to the next slide, we'll give you a little dip in about 1 minute about what exactly we're doing. Okay, so as you can see, what's in front of you is our model. And again, we're still working on it. It's still a work in progress. We still have a lot of pieces to put in. We still have a lot of stakeholders to engage. But as you can see, the learning permit, which is probably unique to North Carolina, we want people to come in and, again, like I said, get bit by the bug, know the thrills and the excitement of teaching when you're pouring into the vessels of the babies. But the learning permit allows people with a associate's degree to come in and work with a co-teacher. It'll be under the co-teacher model, and they can actually see the tenets of what we do in the day-to-day with instruction and see how rewarding it is. And then from license 1 and 2, it's really currently our residency model. We used to call it lateral entry, where you come in with just a BA, but our model pairs you with a highly advanced teacher to make sure you don't have those early missteps, so we can combat that frustration, which largely leads to a lot of the BTs, especially in lateral entry, going ahead and leaving because they don't feel supported. License 3 is if you go through an EPP program and pass the test, you'll come right in as a license 3. But if you come in as a lateral entry, you'll come in that way and progress across until you pass the license requirement. But again, we said before, we want other ways of demonstrating mastery or effectiveness of learning. So we did include in there completing the state-approved micro-credentialing or any other approved process that would demonstrate your effectiveness. License 4, your expert teacher. You had to be effective for at least 3 out of the 5 years. Again, we hope that comes with a bump in salary. And last but not least, you have the advanced teacher role at the end. That's that license 5. Where we hope it's a big increase in compensation, whether or not if you want to stay in the classroom, we have a tier for you for classroom excellence. We'll let you keep banging out those results and get and moving kids forward, or you can do adult leadership where you will be a mentor within the district or in the school so that you can lead other teachers and again provide that support to the BTs to make sure that they feel supported and that they have progressed across the paradigm. Thank you, Ramona. I love the vision map too. If you go to the last slide, Megan, we'll go ahead and wrap this up before I turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Brenda. But again, the benefits of this is to retain excellent teachers, increase capacity, retain early career teachers by supporting the growth, recruit and better prepare new and diverse teachers, raise the rigor, expectations, and esteem of the profession. That's my 5th time saying that today, and invest and grow their future workforce economy. Tabari Wallace's best quote, invest in your human capital and the results will take care of themselves. Over to you, Brenda.
Well, you've covered it really well. It's fantastic. I'll just emphasize a few points. There is a question in the chat about a statewide salary schedule. Yes, North Carolina uniquely, go back to 1931, we had something called the Machinery Act. We pay our teachers from the state level. There's one teacher pay schedule, but each district, and they're mostly countywide districts, can have supplements, and those can be substantial. They are highly correlated with cost of living, so they sort of help kind of adapt to cost of living, but they can be, and Tabari, you kind of alluded to this, someone can jump right across a border if they're moving from kind of a semi-rural to an urban county and make quite a bit more money, so there's some conversation about that. One thing I just want to emphasize also that this ties into something that we've been doing in North Carolina since in Charlotte since before that, but as a state in 2016, something called advanced teaching roles. And so I really want to emphasize this point. Someone earlier was talking about professional development. Advanced teaching roles is this opportunity between a principal no longer having to be the only instructional leader in the school, being able to distribute leadership, beginning teachers getting embedded in professional support from master teachers, and then this master teacher or extended reach teachers having this opportunity to either stay in the classroom and support their fellow teachers and students and pairing up talent with the needs of the students, or just taking on more responsibility. How often do we actually find the opposite, where we give our best teachers a smaller classroom as a reward? Here you can actually give your best teachers a bigger classroom and they can get paid $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 more for a bigger classroom. Master teachers can get paid, in some districts, $20,000 more to be kind of the instructional leader of a group of teachers and students. So this is weaving in this concept of embedded professional development and career opportunities that keep people in the profession and keep them in the classroom instead of moving to administration. What else? Tabari, anything else we've missed? I think, yeah, the idea here is that this would really weave all of these concepts into one, instead of trying. A lot of our policies, with so many of our states, are Band-Aids, right? We have this workaround and that workaround, and this fix, and we're going to put some money over here. And this human capital roundtable concept is to really weave in all of the things that we're struggling with. One more point, Tabari, you talked about effectiveness. Our current licensure system in North Carolina, you can have somebody who's demonstrated to not be effective who can get licensed based off of these tests. You can also have someone who is demonstrated as effective who can not be licensed because they were using kind of the wrong measures, the wrong metrics. So we're really excited about the possibility of really opening up the pipeline to a better pipeline of talent and retaining them.
Thank you, Tabari and Brenda. That is a massively complicated and hugely bold undertaking that you just described in a few minutes. But I hope people see the holistic vision in this, and how you guys are trying to target all of the great strategies that exist in different pockets and what is actually working, and putting it into one solid new redesigned framework for the state to consider. I'd like to turn to Ben and Glenn and get you guys to weigh in on this. You both each serve on a similar group in Mississippi, as Brenda and Tabari do in North Carolina, the Governor's Task Force for Human Capital, which is currently finalizing the recommendations to create another broad framework of policy shifts that have some similarities to what Brenda and Tabari just shared. So I'd love to ask you, Ben and Glenn, to add your own comments here, add your own perspective about how Mississippi's kind of talks about holistic redesign and other recommendations can really target the teacher workforce policies and how they could potentially work if Mississippi marches down that path.
Well, I guess I'll go first. I think we're at a little bit of a disadvantage. I wish we were able to showcase all of our recommendations, but we haven't quite rolled those out yet, as our partners here have. So we can't speak publicly about all those, but I can say that we're working towards the licensure end, especially with the teacher leader endorsement, hopefully in Mississippi, and especially here at my university at William Carey, we have a huge number of educational leadership majors in the graduate level, because great classroom teachers are trying to get to the next level, salary raise, and unfortunately that becomes at the teacher or at the building leader level. So what we hope to do is to keep our best and brightest classroom teachers in the classroom. Not that we don't need good building leaders, because we do, but hopefully we'll be able to keep them in the classroom through a teacher leader endorsement, which is going to have some kind of salary increase. I believe Dr. Smith talked about loan forgiveness, and this first bullet here is not a conversation of our roundtable discussion, but amongst the deans in the state, we've talked a lot about variable tuition, because it doesn't really make rational sense if we're not going to pay teachers what we pay other people, that we would charge the same amount of tuition for undergraduates. Now, that's a very out of the box concept, and I don't know if it has any hope of moving forward in Mississippi, but I think it's very important. Teacher residency models are very important. And at William Carey, we're a part of the Mississippi Teacher Residency Program, and Glenn's school district is one of our districts that we're partnering in, but we just got a pretty large grant through the National Center for Teacher Residency, the Black Educator Initiative, to attract minority teachers for our school districts. And so we'll be working on that this summer to provide more teachers of color by this fall in our classrooms. Glenn?
Let me just jump in and say, Tabari and Brenda, I hope North Carolina doesn't jail me for just plain stealing from you guys. But I really do believe that a lot of what we saw with the North Carolina model, we're trying to work on here in Mississippi. Some great ideas. Ben just alluded to it. Teacher leadership is so important. Rewarding teachers who can work with other teachers and help them cross that bridge. That's one of the key components we're talking about. The different licensure steps in our state. We're talking about the conversation of growing your own. When's the last time you walked into an AP class and said, look, you're interested in engineering and science, why not be a teacher? And having those conversations and walking into your teacher academy and then providing a teaching assistant experience for them the day they graduate from high school, and then plug them into the community college or the IHL world at the same time. All of those are things that we're looking at in a very detailed form. Ben's the more, here's the words, and I'm just kind of the idea guy, but the point is that the same model that you guys are in North Carolina working on, we've got small pockets doing already, but trying to put it in for our state level. And again, I'll say this, one of the keys I think that's going to come out of our work is how do you convince the non-traditional student from becoming traditional and not making them go through that alternate route? How do you grab them immediately in your high schools or in first grade or whatever the case may be, to move them in that so that they don't go out and explore architecture when they could be an outstanding physics or math teacher in a school from the beginning. And I'm sitting here, and you know how teachers are it's a vocation with us. And I'm sitting here thinking about the minority teacher piece that Tabari mentioned. I'm sitting at this desk today because of a minority math teacher in 7th grade. male minority math teacher in 7th grade. So we know we have to recruit those individuals and to make our programs great. But as a whatever, almost dinosaur age student, it was the minority teachers that really helped me along the way in 5th grade, especially, and then 7th grade, where we had strong minority teachers. We've got to keep them in the classroom for all of our students. So important piece. But again, we're stealing from you guys in North Carolina, so keep the North Carolina FBI or whatever it is away from us over here, if you don't mind.
Hey, Megan, want to jump in on Glenn's coattails on his question about how do we get them, because our alternate route program is so much larger than our undergraduate traditional route, and we wish we could do it differently and capture them at an earlier age. As to Glenn's point, and one way that we feel like we can do that is that second bullet there through grow your own programs, because we're reaching out and partnering with school districts all over our state to capture students at the 10th and 11th grade. And we've designed a program for a 3-year undergraduate program to leverage the dual credit that our students in Mississippi are already getting through the college, because they're not coming to us as a true college freshman with no credit. Some of them are coming with 12, 15, or more than 20 hours of college credit. So we've designed a 3-year program that would also, the last 2 years, be a residency model. So really they just take 1 year and then go right back into the schools and become a residency, hopefully in their home school district, because research shows that, especially in our state, most people live, end up working within just a few miles of where they grew up. And so we want their home districts to keep them. But we've also developed cohorts of students around the state, because the old model of everybody moving off to college for 4 years, I just don't think that's the future of higher education. And so we're trying to meet students where they are, literally where they are, so they don't have to move off and go to college, where they can learn in cohort groups, and it's flexible and it meets them where they are in their home communities. So we can keep the best and brightest in their communities, so they'll be vested in what's going on in that school.
And let me close with my point on what Ben is saying. And it's the small victories that are important. So we're sitting here today in the Gulfport School District with 2 teachers. This will be their 2nd year that we began recruiting and working with the Teacher Academy. We hired them right out of high school through the Work Keys test, and then to become a teacher assistant. They worked with a local community college to get that associate's degree. Now with Ben or the University of Southern Mississippi to get their degree. So those are homegrown. They know and understand the Gulfport way of how we do business and trying to reach out children. And they'll stay with us for a lot longer in that world. So it really is, Tabari's mentioned it, Ben's mentioned it, Brenda's mentioned it. That homegrown piece has got to be important to solve this thing across the country.
Thank you, Ben and Glenn, for adding to that and sharing a little snippet, sneak peeks into what Mississippi's working on, and the task force's work that will become more public later this summer. This is a really complex work. I mean, each of these states are putting together recommendation plans and policy frameworks that tie completely changing pathways, really jumping in on successful strategies around new pathways into the profession, recruiting early, boldly increasing teacher supports and professional growth supports, changing licensure, completely upending it, and putting on top of all of that a really different salary schedule that a lot of states do not use, and paying for effectiveness, paying for competency. So it's very complex work, and I want to invite our attendees to start asking some questions. We've had a few coming into the chat, so I'm going to start reading them out, and anyone on our panel, please jump in, but some of you all might be attuned to answering a few of these in particular a bit more than others. I'll kind of go in order of those received. We did have a question early on in our panel today about teacher wellness and staff wellness, and how it's been a hot topic during the pandemic. What dots need to be connected between pandemic-related discussions of staff wellness and these discussions about the teacher pipeline? And are there any policy levers or opportunities that might be getting overlooked? Anyone on our panel want to tackle that question?
I don't know about policy, Megan, but I know this. We've got to acknowledge, to Tabari's point earlier, that COVID-19 and the pandemic and all this quarantining has proven that teachers are important. We've got to celebrate that with every teacher as we return to school for this next year, whether you're face-to-face or still in a virtual situation. We've got to celebrate that. And we've got to keep that momentum going for our teachers. I don't know what policies you can do to do that, but we've also got to understand that they have been through a very tough 18 months. And we got to all regroup. And of course, one of the benefits of being a teacher is you get a couple of, 3 or 4, 6 weeks off to start all over, and every school year is really different. So you have that piece to do. But I'm also sitting here on a Friday afternoon at 2:15 Central Time with 30 teachers down the hallway learning about how to use more manipulatives in mathematics. So teachers are just driven to be great. But we've got to take from the COVID the acknowledgement that teachers were part of the success of this country in getting through the COVID process and the pandemic.
Thanks, Glenn. I'll move us on along because we're getting lots of good questions coming in. One question about salaries. Salaries are key, and salary structures can encourage and discourage different paths. One thing I've noticed is that Mississippi districts, large ones that I know of, don't offer differentiated pay for hard to staff subjects or schools or high performing teachers, but they do pay a bit extra for master's degrees. Overall, it's been shown that teachers are not necessarily more effective with a master's degree, with a few exceptions. So how about modifying salary schedules to pay for hard to staff or high performing and encourage that instead of encouraging advanced degrees, which potentially forces people to pay more in tuition and incur more debt for only a little bit of extra salary. So you guys are talking about that a lot in both North Carolina and Mississippi. Maybe both will want to weigh in here.
Megan, can I just start off with just a little bit? I'm a firm believer as a former school superintendent and principal for differentiating what we pay people. One of the most painful experiences I would have as a school principal was passing out contracts at the end of the year because at that point, of course, the salaries are public knowledge. It was not a confidential matter, but just seeing what every teacher in my hall was making, and the high-flying teachers that might have been younger and only had it 3 or 4 years, having much better results, but making $20,000 or $30,000 less than some that were just not being effective. So I'm a firm believer that we should pay our more effective teachers more. In our school district, when I was still a superintendent, was a part of a pilot project for merit-based pay in Mississippi. But I can tell you unequivocally that we couldn't come up with a great way to do it. So while I believe in it strongly, I think that it's one of the most complex issues to write down on paper and quantify and say, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to prove that somebody is a better teacher and deserves more money. The principals in the buildings know, but you can't just let a principal go down and make a check mark on who gets more money and who doesn't. So it's a very difficult issue, but I do think it's what we need to do. We need to reward people who are more effective. That's the way the business world works, and that's just my opinion.
And one of the things we do here in Gulfport is we do try to reach out as quickly as possible to those individuals, and we have supplements for lead teachers. So as you come into the system and you prove to be that great teacher, we can work you with pods of teachers and give you a group, a PLC, so to speak, that you'll work with, and we can add a little bit of extra pay as a supplement from our perspective from the local world. So I agree with what Ben has said. And again, I think that Nick has mentioned that, Tabari's mentioned that, Brenda's mentioned that across the state, that just rewarding teachers for helping production of their own students, helping other teachers.
Yeah, and I'll touch on that just for a minute, because the economics of that are really interesting. It's one thing if you just say, okay, if you're in a high poverty school, I'm going to pay you $10,000 more. That's really expensive for one thing, and you're not going to recruit somebody from Raleigh to Edgecombe County, even at $30,000 a year. They're settled, their family's there, they're working there. You're not going to recruit people away per se. So that's where, one, grow your own programs are really important. And Dr. Smith's point about actually prefer scholarships to loan forgiveness, but really recruiting people in. The other aspect is with advanced roles. So think about this, advanced roles, we're talking about 40% of the teaching population, 30 to 40% of the teaching population. If 10% are the master teachers who have this kind of administrative role working with their teachers, and 20 or 30% are getting paid more to do more based on effectiveness, you naturally have a way for people to say, listen, there just isn't that job in my school. I'm not going to get it just because I'm good, but the job has to be there, just like, by the way, the rest of the world works. And so there will be more opportunity and more paths into, say, a Title I school, because that job may not be in their non-Title I school. Does that make sense? So the economics of just supply and demand, that if you have actually a pretty large supply of teachers who get into these advanced roles, but it's still only a certain percentage within that building, it's going to pull people into other schools naturally, while also you're actually paying them to do more, right? You're not just paying them for retention. So that's one twist on that conversation that we're looking at.
And I want to jump in there. Oh, go ahead, Tabari.
No, Nick, I'll go after you, boss.
Thank you, sir. And actually, one of the participants mentioned this in the chat too, so I want to make sure I bring this up. An example that our legislature and Governor Ivey signed into law actually last month is the TEAMS Act in Alabama. And this is specifically looking to address a couple of the factors that we've discussed here, including honing in on what is the highest acuity in your teacher shortage areas. So we identified math and science, and then that's exponentially increases due to rurality. And so what we're talking about doing here is paying teachers up to $15,000 or more a year beginning next school year. They have to commit to a results-oriented contract. They also have to be willing to receive a national certification in science and mathematics. And those that are serving in a hard-to-staff area get an additional $5,000. So each of those steps is part of the $5,000 each that adds up to $15,000. So we're addressing the needs of rural schools. We're addressing the retention issue, because these are teachers that were under a regular contract in that school. And so we're not asking to necessarily move someone from a different part of the state to one of these shortage areas, but making it easier to keep those high quality math and science teachers in the hard to staff rural schools. So no data yet, we're just now implementing it. So look forward to sharing results with you next time.
And Nick, you kind of in alignment with what I was just about to say, with the sense of collective efficacy is what you want to garner in each one of your schools. Sometimes an unintended consequence of teacher bonuses based on student performances. Again, sometimes a student has a lot to do with it. You have slow learners, you have mid learners, and then you have high achievers, AP kids that can pretty much teach themselves if you give them the content. And then what we found when we were doing bonuses, when we didn't tie it to licensure, was that it was an ability to not share with your peers because you wanted to keep getting that bonus. So whenever we do these teacher bonuses, that's why we, with the Human Capital Roundtable, tied it to licensure. So when you get to that license 5, and you either want to do the mentor category or you want to do the teacher effective classroom category, then you're still in that school and you're still growing the teachers in that school based on pedagogy and content to make sure that the whole school is at a master's level in the developing the talents of the babies. So so it's a give and take there. So we're watching you, Mississippi. I heard what you said. So we want to watch and see what outcomes y'all have so we can learn from you.
Thank you guys for that. And thank you, Patricia, for that good question around salaries. That ignited a whole bunch of extra points there on that piece. So really appreciate that, because it's big. Question from Arnold. Is there a federal role here, a calling at the national level, more robust teach grants, a teacher core, larger Pell grants? Anybody want to take a stab at the national role in this? You know, that's a little bit of a, not the focus for you guys, but anybody have opinions?
So I'll just jump in here a little bit about the national role, and I fully agree with whoever raised that particular question, because one unintended consequence here of trying to make every state more attractive at recruiting new teachers is that you sometimes end up pulling from other states. And the impending teacher shortage is actually going to be a national thing. We are looking post-COVID. Well, we're expecting, as economists, one of the greatest recoveries that we've seen in a long time. We have not yet recovered the full 22 million jobs that we lost in March of last year, but we're pretty close. And the last unemployment levels were, as my memory, 5.8% with 559,000 jobs last year. So they're really expecting a huge comeback and a huge turnaround nationally. And that can really mean increases in competition across state borders. So a concern here is, even if every individual state is doing what the needful to take care of their own individual, state requirements for those particular teachers, then, there could be an issue for the entire program because it is a zero-sum game. So what can we do to impact the national conversation about this is also pretty important.
I'll add also, as we're looking at COVID money and one-time money, and everybody's sort of in a panic about making sure that we're not investing in long-term, but investing in systemic changes. Arnie, by the way, shout out because you were my mentor in Capitol Hill a long, long time ago. Thank you for the question. One issue that we're tackling with this work is how do you measure effectiveness, right? So how do we convert these conversations about, for example, standards, national standards, to competency-based education? How can we invest in technology? When Arnie and I knew each other in 1993, I took the GRE exam on a computer. It took an hour and a half and I had my test results. But we stick these babies, Tabari's babies, in a classroom writing out bubble sheets for hours and hours on end, and we don't really know where our kids sit. So I know it doesn't sound like a teacher issue, but competency-based learning, competency assessment is a really important factor, and also in understanding how many competencies is one teacher gaining with a student over the course of the years. How can we use that as one of our tools in determining your progress through your profession and helping fine-tune and provide professional development? So it may not seem like a related investment, but I really think if we could, as states and federal government, really invest in some of this technology, new testing, new competency-based models, that could go a long way to helping not just the students, but the teachers.
I'm going to give 30 seconds for this last question. I think perhaps, Brenda, you might be able to answer this quickest and maybe plug a few things in the chat. But one thing came through, has there been any marketing research completed by the states? If so, what has the marketing research shown in the best ways or things to showcase to support recruitment in our field?
Yeah, such a great question. And we did, and teach.org is our partner in TeachNC. They have several places around the country they're working. North Carolina is the best because Tabari and his team are amazing. But what they're finding are exactly what I shared earlier, that there is a lot more interest in the profession than we know about. There are thousands in North Carolina, thousands of people who are interested in the profession. The first barrier really is information, accurate information instead of just headline news. You can make almost $100,000 in North Carolina if you are doing one of these advanced roles. Nobody ever talks about that. We had at one point $1 billion investment over a short period of time into teaching, and we don't hear about that. So one, more information. Two, this one-on-one supports. Particularly, we're 80% white, 80% female. If we want non-white and non-female candidates, they're the ones who aren't being recruited by their teacher who doesn't look like them, right? So one-on-one supports from those candidates to answer those questions that they weren't willing to ask their white female teacher, to be honest. So some of those, there's a lot out there that can be done actually at a low cost, and we saw that with just this TeachNC work. It's not as impossible as you think in terms of quantity, but those targeted efforts, like Alabama, kudos to you. By the way, Nick, we're going to be talking, but being able to really invest, like the military sees a vacancy as a national security crisis. We should see a vacancy in teaching as a national security crisis. And what the military does is they say, I have to fill that position and I'm going to pay until I fill that position. We're not allowed to do that. It's taboo in our conversation. So Nick, kudos to you. We need to have some of those tough conversations. So one, broadening the pipeline is not as hard as you think. but targeting those hard to staff subjects is.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, panelists. Let's give our panelists a virtual round of applause, please, for their insightful discussion and sharing the bold, innovative thinking taking place in our region of the country. SREB is so grateful to be a small part of the work. The ideas that are coming out of North Carolina and Mississippi, as well as Alabama, they've had some similar conversations too. They're all backed by continuous research and study of individual state and district strategies that are positively affecting teacher retention, recruitment, instructional growth, and redesigning these numerous state policies purposefully and holistically, the ways that North Carolina and Mississippi are talking about it. It's like, for me, I think about it as combining the best ingredients for a recipe that we believe will dramatically decrease teacher shortages and potentially even reverse the problem, and make teaching a highly sought after and competitive field, raising the esteem of the profession, as Tabari said, equitably distributing instructional capacity, growing all of our students, every single one of them, and providing long-term investments in the next generation of the workforce as a whole. So we appreciate all of you joining us today. Please visit our website on the link on the screen for more information about research on all of these topics, more information about the North Carolina and Mississippi work, as well as other conversations that have happened around the area in Alabama and Oklahoma. And please tune in on Wednesday, June 16th for the third in SREB's summer webinar series for a governor's panel on education and workforce recovery. It'll actually be featuring Nick's boss, Governor Kay Ivey in Alabama, as well as Delaware Governor John Carney and Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. So you can register for that webinar on June 16th right now still. So hopefully we'll see some of you back for that as well. Thank you again to our 6 panelists. Love to have you today. It was wonderful. And we hope all of our participants have a wonderful weekend.